Hey everyone, my name is Eugene Katz. I'm with Cribl Professional Services and also doing enablement. So I'm here today to talk about sandboxes and specifically using a sandbox to walk through Syslog ingestion and writing out to S3 compatible storage. And sandboxes is something we have available to anybody on demand right on our site. You can get the URL or just search for Cribl Sandboxes. And there's a lot of good stuff. The one we're going to focus on today is archiving to S3. So all you need to do is put in your email address, and you're going to get an email and allow the sandbox to get started up. While we wait for that, the nice thing about it is even if you don't spin up a sandbox, you can look through the instructions and always find some tricks here. Oh, how do I configure, S3 destination? You can look through it without having to run through the sandbox fully. But as you can see, there are pretty detailed instructions on the sandbox. It talks about how you get back in if you get logged out. The sandbox is going to be up for 24 hours. The other nice thing about it, and I use this trick, is if I just need a VM environment to play in and I don't feel like spinning up something in Docker or go into my cloud instance, you can always just go get a sandbox, mess around with inputs, outputs. It's not restricted to this use case. So anything you want to do with it, you can. What we're going to be talking about here is a case where you are taking your firewall data, in this case, Palo Alto, ingested through Syslog, and sending it out to archive. So that's the lower part here. Archive in this case is S3 compatible storage. Talk about what S3 compatible storage means, because when people talk about S3, often they think, oh, it's Amazon. We have to, put it up in the cloud, and some people are worried about getting their data out there. But that's something to keep in mind, is that S3 is a protocol. AWS S3 is what Amazon runs, but you can have on-prem S3 compatible storage. In fact, when I was on the customer side, I was a customer before I became part of Cribl, we would write out to S3 compatible storage exactly for this use case. So once you write your logs into S3, you can replay them out of it. There's a sandbox that focuses on that, I believe. We're just going to do the writing to keep it brief as an introduction, but you have all sorts of options. So instead of just sending directly to the SEM, we're going to be doing this part of sending to the archive, and then can be in parallel sent to the SEM or replayed out later. And the sandbox kind of talks about a couple of these different scenarios. You might have, vendor evaluation where you were using this SEM right now, but maybe later you want to use a different one. And in that case, some SEMs allow to require you to train it for some period of time with some data. Well, if you already have a backlog of data in archive, you can just replay it, and now you have all this training data without having to wait. So all sorts of options. Again, getting specifically into this sandbox information, Palo Alto Syslog, we're going to ingest that, send it through a pipeline and out to S3. And all the steps, again, with all the sandboxes, very detailed, outlined. You can learn about sources as you go through them. And one thing that's different between this and probably the environment you're using is this is a single instance environment. So we're not going to be seeing the commit and deploy button. So as soon as you save stuff, it's going to be active. Let's go to manage our sources, and there's Syslog. We're going to add one and then just copy over things to make life easier and avoid typos, because typos, it's one of my specialties, and I'm not going to do that. You can do TCP, you can do UDP, you can do different ports for TCP and UDP if you needed to. So if we save this, as I said, no commit and deploy, it becomes active immediately, and we can hit live and see this is generated Syslog traffic coming as if from Palo Alto. So one thing to look at here, because this is a Syslog source, it handles some things automatically. Syslog is actually a protocol. You can look up the RFCs, but what that primarily is concerned with is the fact that there is this beginning of the header here. I guess in this case it actually includes 7. So depending on the version of the protocol, it may have more or less information in the syslog header. It'll have a timestamp. It'll have the host, and then potentially more information. Also in the angle brackets, it's going to have priority and severity encoded. So you see the angle brackets 14. One thing to keep in mind is Syslog as a protocol. Sometimes people send things, and there are vendors that send over Syslog, but it's not actually Syslog protocol, so it will not have a valid header, in which case you're not going to have the things that I'm going to talk about in a moment. And the easy way to tell if it has a raw and underscore time, but no other fields, that means it's not getting parsed properly. In fact, there's going to be internal field that says that it failed to parse syslog, but we're not going to get too far into it. From the header is where our timestamp is getting parsed. We can see, and the easy way I usually go is look at the subsecond and the seconds, and it's like, yep, it is the seconds end with a 7, and it's 293, so it's getting parsed out properly. The app name gets parsed out, the facility and severity codes get parsed out, and their names get filled in. Then you have your host and so on. And then the rest of it is message. So if it comes in proper syslog format, you're going to get, and you're using the syslog source, you're going to get automatically all these fields broken out. So there's our first step. Now let's create our destination. So under destinations, and it talks about here a little bit that S3, really MinIO under the covers. MinIO is just a local instantiation of S3 compatible storage. So you don't have, so we actually have a tile for MinIO, but we can just use the S3 pretending that we're writing to S3 for the purposes of the sandbox. There's a lot of detail to go into for S3. There are syslog best practices. Syslog best practices also, this is Amazon S3 best practices. Gets into all the details of how you want to configure your syslog destination depending on how much data you're seeing, how many worker processes you have, how much space you have, and so on. So this is really good information to read up on if you're going to be configuring S3 destinations. Syslog best practices is another thing. We're not really getting into that too much about how to send things in, but we have a page in our docs for that as well. So skipping over all these explanations, you can go back and take a look if you need to. The main things are we're going to have output ID, we're going to have our S3 bucket. Now the copying didn't copy the single code, so I'll put those back in. Staging location. So staging location is where you're going to have your files put while it's getting ready to zip it up, or not zip it up if you don't have compression enabled, and send out to S3. Because this is a batching type destination where it'll keep writing to a file. Once the file is big enough, or it has enough events, or whatever the case is, it's going to ship it out. So it's not a streaming destinations where it's constantly sending things out, like for example, if you're sending to a syslog destination. So let's get that key prefix in there. And this is in the bucket, that's going to be your kind of main folder. You can have a more complex one. We're not really doing much here. Really important part is partition expression. Again, the S3 best practices go into that. It's how your information, your files are going to be organized. In this case, we're taking the default, which is year, month, day. You might want to use source type or something similar, and you might want to put your firewall data in one spot and your Linux syslog in a different folders for retrieval. So really, as you are deciding on your partition expression, you got to think about how am I going to retrieve this information, and also how many different files are going to have to be open at the same time as things are being written. Again, all well covered in that reference. And then let's get our region. Virginia. All right, that looks pretty good. Sure, I'm not skipping any steps. Yep, or MinIO, that's right. So because it's a MinIO, we need to set up authentication. If you're using true S3, and you may have other options, but for right now, we're just doing this. I shouldn't say true S3, I should say AWS S3. And our advanced settings endpoint is just min.io run locally. Well, doesn't have to be locally, but I believe it is on port 9000. We can create a data route. What I like to do usually first is just go and make sure things work. Now, you can always go to test. You can always send whatever you want. Just hit run test and success. It doesn't mean everything worked perfectly. You might get a success because the events were accepted. It's always a good idea to check the logs to see if anything went wrong. It doesn't look like we have any errors, so that's good. So now moving on to the data routes. So we got our source, we got our destination. How are we going to route the data? There are options. The other option is Quick Connect. In this case, we're using data routes. So let's go do that. And we can see, so already, without doing anything else, because we turned on the source and we got events flowing in, the data route with a filter true, this is the default, catches it, and we see the spark line showing, okay, well, before we turn this on, 11 minutes past the hour, we didn't have it. Now we have things going through. We don't want to drop into our last routes, so let's create a new route. We'll leave the filter true. Normally, what you would do is you would say, okay, this is coming from, let's say, Palo Alto source. In fact, we'll go slightly off script and say, we're looking for things coming from this source. Input filters are pre-configured with sources, so you can just pick from there, right? Because if you had multiple sources, you would need to split this up. You might have multiple syslog sources. All right, yeah, we leave that alone. So for our output pipeline, we're just doing the pass-through for now, and output is S3. Let's see, pretty good. Now, one important thing is routes get evaluated in order. So if we hit save here, this route is never going to be hit. In fact, that's what this little exclamation point is telling you, is that you're never going to get here because all events are going to be matched by this true filter. Because this true filter is final, it's going to consume all these events. Nothing is going to go down. So what we want this up here. And now we're happy. Let's make sure we didn't skip anything. Yeah, that's actually that. So once I hit save, we should see events start going through here. And the way we're going to do it, we can wait here for this to refresh, or we can go to the monitoring page just to have another thing to look at. So this is the overall input, right? And this is our one source that we configured. And there we go. It's processing. And in this case, we want to go to routes. We don't see the spark line yet, but because in comparison, it's only 9 events. But we do see that we're getting some events into this new route. What we should see is we should see the top one drop off and the bottom one start ingesting. We can hit live. So what it'll do is it'll use the filter defined for that route and start a live capture immediately for you. Live capture, it doesn't matter from where, it doesn't matter which filter you use, it just automatically starts for, there we go, that's what I wanted to see. So now we got this route consuming the events and this route no longer getting those events, so the averages will go down over time. And the only reason, so if we go back to the data routes, there we go. So we have our new route, Sparkline getting events, and we're no longer getting events here. And that's really the whole thing that I wanted to talk about today. Hopefully this is a good start for you to get a little bit of exposure to Syslog and to S3 with a few deeper dives here and there. Again, you can fire this up yourself anytime or any of the other sandboxes and play around with it. Go to our docs, read up on the best practices for Syslog and S3, and have at it. Thanks.